Perhaps more than any other work of George Orwell, arguably even more so than 1984, millions upon millions of readers in numerous countries across the globe are acquainted with Animal Farm. What Orwell referred to as his little squib. This little squib has sold more than 20 million copies in 6 languages, and was the first book to really turn the intellectual and cultural tide of the Cold War. It was, in effect, having been published just 3 weeks after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the equivalent of a cultural cold bomb on the intellectual front. And it decisively participated in events that made Americans in particular, but also the European allies, skeptical of their former wartime ally, the Soviet Union, and Uncle Joe, Stalin, as he was called. And it soon became one of the scriptures of early Cold Warriors, with Orwell, even before his death, becoming a member of that group, and posthumously the most famous literary Cold Warrior of the middle decades of the 20th century. Animal Farm. One of its many appeals is that, as so many people have said to me, it's so easy to read. Even elementary school children can read it and enjoy it. Indeed, this is so. But ladies and gentlemen, what is easy is not necessarily simple. And what is easy may only then be seemingly simple. And what is seemingly simple may in reality be enormously complex. And today, I'd like to make the case to you that that is precisely what is at issue in Animal Farm. And so my title, although phrased provocatively, is meant quite seriously. But some are more equal than others. Why Animal Farm is the most difficult classic. Now you may say, the most difficult classic. That's surely an exaggeration. A provocative formulation, but my point is that if you believe it is so simple, then you miss so much of significance that is going on. If you believe something is difficult, you will treat it as the challenge that it is. Animal Farm inadvertently, because of the ease of the reading experience, may lull the reader into equating ease and simplicity, instead of seeing Animal Farm as an enormously challenging and, yes, difficult work. What gives rise to the conviction that it is easy is not just the reading experience, but the fact that it so completely conforms to Orwell's dictum for good writing. It is clarity, simplicity, youth. The sentences are short, as advocated in Politics and English Language. There is no jargon. Sentence by sentence, an elementary or junior high school reader can indeed go right through this little book. And indeed, it's not even 100 pages long. All these factors definitely make for an easy reading experience sentence by sentence. In other words, textually, Animal Farm is indeed quite simple. What is challenging is not the text on a sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph level, but rather the context, the subtext. Textually simple, contextually and subtextually challenging. And so, you see, traditional close readings, as in the New Criticism, or in the German's Werk am Intellektuellen, or French Explication du Texte, are utterly inadequate for uncovering the complexity of Animal Farm. In order to appreciate why Animal Farm is so difficult and truly grasp what is going on in this work, one needs to attend to the extraordinarily rich context and numerous subtexts of the work. Now, in the next few minutes, what I would like to do is to address these facts by way of explaining further the title of my talk. Why is Animal Farm so difficult? Why has it been so misinterpreted by millions of readers? Who, not unlike the young son of Herbert Reed, one of Orwell's friends, a 10-year-old, about whom Herbert Reed wrote Orwell, after Reed and his son read the book. Reed wrote, "I enjoyed the book just as much as my young son, though I appreciated what you were attempting to do, and he read it quite innocently, as an animal story," which is also what the editors of Dial Press did when Orwell's agent, Leonard Moore, submitted the book to them for American publication. "Dear Mr. Orwell, we regret to inform you that Dial Press does not publish animal stories." But it wasn't just American publishers who you thought would have known better. Even British booksellers made the same mistake. Orwell went scurrying around London bookshops himself, moving Animal Farm from the children's section to the adult section upon publication. And on and on and on. Not just elementary and junior high school students, but presumably sophisticated readers in the publishing industry and in the book-selling industry made the same mistake. And I would argue that they are even more prone to do so today because we are so distant from the Cold War events about which Orwell was writing. And so we are even more liable as new generations who are unfamiliar with the history of the 20th century and the larger context in which the book was written and the historical background against which it was appearing. Even more liable to make these same mistakes. Speaking personally, I discovered this myself when I taught the book first to 10th grade students, then to college freshmen in the USA, then to college upperclassmen in a utopia class, and then finally to PhD students. It wasn't until the fourth and last group, and after discussing the work at length in the classroom, that students came to an appreciation of what the book was about. Perhaps more embarrassingly, when I published a book in the 1990s devoted exclusively to Animal Farm, and visited a number of different junior and senior high schools to introduce the book, I discovered to my regret that even though Animal Farm was on the syllabus and being taught, the vast majority of the high school teachers with whom I spoke had no depth of understanding of the context in which we live. If the teachers do not, how will the students ever? So this is just to reinforce the perception that Animal Farm is a very challenging book. Why so difficult? Why has it been so misunderstood as a mere animal story? First, and most importantly, what I've already alluded to, the pedagogical complexity of the book. Is, if you think it is so easy, you will read it merely on the literal level, as an animal story. If you grant that it is a contemporary classic that participates, like all the great classics, in the depth of a literary tradition, then you are equipped to be prepared to work and uncover the context and subtext. So appreciating pedagogical complexity is crucial, and a failure to do so has been a major factor, possibly the prime factor, in the misperception of Animal Farm as just an animal story, only needing to be attended to on the literal level. A second factor is also extremely important: the generic complexity of the work. That is, what is the literary tradition or traditions in which Animal Farm participates? One needs to appreciate that Animal Farm is a combination of three genres: the beast fable, the satire, and the allegory, each of which is of decisive significance in the way that the book is woven. And Orwell writes in his great essay, Why I Write, of 1946, just published a few months after Animal Farm, that Animal Farm was the first book in which he attempted to fuse political writing into an art. And I would insist that he succeeded outstandingly. outstandingly well, but so well that the complexity of the work is masked by that success. Because Animal Farm flows so readily on its surface, it does indeed seem so simple. Because the beast fable, the satire, and the allegory are woven so seamlessly into an artistic whole, Animal Farm can appeal to Herbert Reed's 10-year-old son. Just as much as to an adult reader. That is a tremendous achievement, partly accounting for why Animal Farm has been read from such a young age on. How then do these three genres interact, interweave? The beast fable, traceable to Aesop, typically has a moral. In Aesop, the moral was actually stated explicitly as such at the close of each of his anecdotes. Moral, colon, and then whatever the lesson was. For instance, in the fable of the tortoise and the hare, moral, the race goes not to the swift, but to the enduring. But Orwell's fable has no explicit moral. And so this gives rise to the other interpretation, misinterpretation. Either Animal Farm is read innocently as an animal story, or Animal Farm is read in a charged, incendiary fashion as an ideological tract. It is an anti-communist bromide. The lesson, colon, all revolutions will be perverted. Or moral, colon, the lesson, leaders are pigs. Or some version thereof. Innocence and ideology. That is the polar ping pong that Animal Farm has suffered throughout the decades. Readers who stay exclusively on the literal level, like Herbert Reed's young son, will see it as innocent. Readers who ignore the generic complexity and see it simply as a beast fable for contemporary times will point the finger via Animal Farm at their political enemies. Beginning, of course, during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, but since that time broadened with Animal Farm as a salvo fired against all revolutions, communist or otherwise. Animal Farm is a beast fable, and like the traditional beast fable, it's an attempt to show that animals can behave like human beings, but human beings can behave like animals. Which is why in Animal Farm, each of the animals has human characteristics of some kind. Only the pigs as a group actually talk and can read, that is, are intelligent, literate human beings. Although Benjamin Donkey, who is often seen as a stand-in for Orwell himself, is the other character capable of matching them. But the beast fable is only one of the three genres at work here. Animal Farm is also an extremely sophisticated political and cultural satire. A satire of events happening in the early decades of the 20th century. Orwell's satire is very sharp. And, of course, if we fail to appreciate the book as a work of satire, that is, one in which it's extremely important to see that it is doing something more than just telling an animal story. It is serving as a critique, as a not so thinly veiled criticism of politics and culture in the West and in the Soviet Union in the middle decades of the 20th century. Linked to that is the third genre, the allegory. The allegory. Here again, an important traditional literary genre. Animal Farm is an allegory of historical events with precise one-to-one correspondences in Soviet history between 1917, or arguably even earlier, and 1943, ending with the wartime conference, Yalta, 1943. The correspondences involve characters, they involve political and historical events, and on and on. So, it's not enough to know that Napoleon the Pig is meant to be a composite of Karl Marx and Lenin, and that Snowball the Pig is primarily a figure representing Leon Trotsky. A host of other events are also featured in Animal Farm. Some of them more subtle, some of them more obvious. For instance, the figure of Mr. Whymper, who conducts trade between Animal Farms, pigs, and the outer world of human farms, represents the decision by the Western powers in the Treaty of Rapallo in the early 1920s to begin establishing relations with the new communist state under Lenin and Stalin. This is just one of the many nuanced, delicate, intricately subtle ways in which Orwell is linking up historical personages in Animal Farm, events in 20th century history, to make this beast fable cum satire cum allegory what might be referred to as an anima allegory, A-N-I-M-A-L-L-E-G-O-R-Y, such a brilliant work of art. If we do not appreciate the generic complexity of the work, if we allow ourselves the pedagogical complacency of assuming that it is an issue only on the literal level as an easy story, then we fail to see how difficult this work is and why indeed it deserves its status as a classic. But a third factor, allegorical scope and depth, goes even beyond the generic complexity of my mentioning allegory. That is, allegorical scope and depth also refer to the fact that Orwell is taking a very broad historical lens and going also very, very deep into an understanding of context and subtext. Sketching things in just a few words to describe a character or an event, he then invites the informed reader to supply all the rest. The reader, the culture's knowledge of Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, World War II, the emerging Cold War, the tension between the European and American democracies and the new communist state under the Bolsheviks, etc., etc. That is, we readers supply so much of what is only stated implicitly or in a word or a phrase. It is Orwell's sophisticated reliance upon context and subtext, and indeed upon the audience to whom he was addressing, that also make Animal Farm a great classic. Orwell places enormous trust in his reader. Having given us, so to speak, a thumbnail text, he, as the author, trusts the power of understatement, the power of suggestion, and pays his reader the respect of supplying so much that is not explicitly stated. That is, he trusts us to read between the lines. And that is why, again, without the knowledge of this historical context and political background, one cannot possibly value Animal Farm as it should be. Fourth, curricular misjudgment. As I suggested earlier, Animal Farm is a book of such fame and wide appeal because many, many millions of readers report that they first encountered it in junior high school, in a classroom. Yes, indeed. Now, one would think that might be a welcome development. Unfortunately, because one cannot expect a 10-year-old or even 15-year-old to have much of a grasp of this historical context, Animal Farm has been inappropriately assigned prematurely. It is read as a required book in classrooms before pupils are intellectually prepared, or let's say before teachers are intellectually equipped to inform the students properly. The problem of pedagogical complexity is not limited to pupils and students, but unfortunately also is one that teachers need to be better educated about. You see, teachers in English departments, in their training as undergraduates and even beyond, are often taught the literary divorced from the historical. That is, they may be excellent interpreters in some sense of close reading of a work textually, but that is not accompanied by an historical and political sophistication as to what the content or context and subtext of a work may be about. And so teachers need to be better educated so that they can educate the students. They need to go beyond the literary to appreciate in a work like Animal Farm the historical, the political, the cultural, the sociological, a much more holistic form of literary education. And so when I speak of curricular misjudgment, of course I'm talking about the worry of prematurely assigning Animal Farm in junior high school, and perhaps even senior high school, perhaps even freshman year of college. But the problem is not limited to students. It is also the one for faculty. Fifth factor, historical timing and educational policy. Animal Farm entered Anglo-American curricula and then later German curricula in the 1950s. Millions of copies of the book were purchased. And as I discovered during the book tour that I made, visiting many junior and senior high school classes, Animal Farm was still being taught in the 1990s and in the 21st century. And why? Well, one unexpected answer that I repeatedly had from department heads and assistant principals was this. Years ago, we purchased hundreds of copies of this book. So we had it around. We can't afford new required text in that volume. And so Animal Farm, ironically, was being taught in so many American public schools because for decades, given that hundreds of copies of the book were available, what is available will be used, like an old textbook. And in this case, a textbook that doesn't need to be revised ever. So Animal Farm enters during the Cold War and begins to be taught and shaped by Cold War events. When the Cold War is no more, Animal Farm remains, to no small extent, because it is there. Because the copies of the book are available. And that, of course, is educational policy, given the limitations of financial resources. And, of course, the fact that teachers who have been teaching something for years will often prefer to continue doing that than work at something new. Sixth and finally, cinematic representation, or misrepresentation. One of the reasons that Animal Farm became canonical in the 1950s, both in Britain and America, was that the 1954 Hayless and Batchelor adaptation had just appeared. This was a Disney-esque production, making Animal Farm the first serious, full-length animated cartoon. The first book ever to appear in animation that was serious classic. So, book and film were usually taught together. And I did so in the 1970s when I taught the book in senior high school. However, the film misrepresents the book. Students or even teachers who don't read Animal Farm all the way to the end may take the film as a straightforward adaptation. But you see, the film appears just a few months after the failed Arbeiteraufstand, workers' uprising in Berlin in June 1953. Animal Farm was an attempt on the part of the British filmmakers to reflect the rollback policy, as it was referred to. This was a term coined by John Foster Dulles, Eisenhower's Secretary of State, and it was being prominently discussed not only in American foreign policy but also in Europe. That is, now that Stalin's armies have occupied Eastern Europe, but we have the bomb, the atomic bomb, excuse me, the nuclear bomb, and they do not yet. They only have the atomic bomb. Roll them back. Roll them back. The two theories that were dominant and competing at the time, George Kennan's containment theory, limit the communists to their sphere of influence, establish spheres of influence. Let the communists have what they now have, but contain them beyond that, was opposed by the rollback theory. The film reflects the rollback theory. That is, the film has an ending in which Benjamin and Boxer suddenly appear and march on Animal Farm along with thousands upon thousands of fellow animals, fellow oppressed workers, and trample Animal Farm to the ground so that the pigs go down to defeat. In effect, what the film was doing was calling upon workers in the communist world not to become discouraged by the failure of the Berlin uprising in June 1953 and the way in which Stalin ruthlessly suppressed it, but rather continue to have the courage to challenge Stalin and roll back the communists out of Eastern Europe. Here again, if you do not understand that this is a cinematic misrepresentation, and simply watch the film, you are not reading the book that George Orwell wrote. You are not acquainted with the Animal Farm, which ends with Yalta 1943 and the humans and Napoleon in their card game both playing the ace of spades. That is, they will vie, they will compete for dominance in the globe, with Orwell envisioning the Cold War on the horizon. Nowadays, it may be more common to show the 1999 animatronic film. This is a kind of Mr. Ed talking animals film, like Babe or Babe Pig in the City of the 1990s, famous films in which robots, human robots in the form of animals, appear as characters. But this animal farm, too, is linked to historical events. So, for instance, the 1999 version ends, apparently, with the post-communist, post-1989 revolutions serving as its backdrop. The question at the end of the 1999 film is whether things can possibly return to how they were before the communist era ended, or whether everything has been changed. That is, do we trust the human beings to run their own farms again, or will they turn out to be oppressive figures like the Tsar was, and a new generation of animals will suffer? The film leaves it an open question. That is, what's the future of the post-communist countries after 1989? And so, Animal Farm is the most difficult classic because of all of these 6 factors. In conclusion, George Orwell's Animal Farm. Neither innocent nor ideological, but rather on a continuum between the two. A contemporary classic, easy to read, but not at all simple. Why? Because Orwell succeeded so beautifully in his golden why I write